આપણે શરૂ કરીએ. પ્રણામ, જય જિનેન્દ્ર બધાને. Welcome to the 5th session of an introduction to Jainism class. Before we start on today's topic, we'll just start with the prayers and then carry on. The session today will be more interactive. So those of you who feel able to and want to share, we will the class today, you can have your videos on, and that might make the class a bit more interactive. So please feel free to put on your video. Thank you. Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayariyanam, Namo Vajjayanam, Namo Loe Sabba Sahunam. एसो पंचनमुक्कारो सब्बपावपणासनो मंगलानं च सब्वेसिं परमं हवै मंगलम् वीरसुरसुरासुरेन्द्रमहितो वीरमुदा संश्रिता वीरेणाभिहत स्वकर्मनिचयो वीराय नित्यं नमः वीरातीर्थमिदं प्रौतमतुलं वीरशघोरं तपो वीरे श्रीधृतिकीर्तिकान्तिनिचय श्रीवीरभद्रं दिश अंगूठे अमृतवसे लपतितणा भंडार श्री गुरु गौतम समोरिये मनवांछित फलदातार. Now, I'd planned this session from the beginning, and maybe this particular session could have been brought in a week early, but I had anticipated a lot of questions, and I think the questions that have been put uh, to me through the chat uh, are actually bringing out some of the dilemmas and the um, difficulties in understanding the concepts of what we are talking about. So I'm hoping to address those questions. So in many ways, this class may be able to answer a lot of the questions that have been raised in the chat. But in addition, there may be other questions that you may have in mind that I'm hoping that the answers to these questions will actually answer as well. But while the class is going on, please feel free to continue putting your questions in the chat. And if you've got your video on and want to ask a question um, verbally, then please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. That may make it more interesting. We're trying this for this particular class. So when Satipai is back next week, at that stage, we will review this experiment for this week that we are trying. Okay. Now, I'm just going to share my screen with the questions that you put together. The first 5 slides are the same as they've been before. They just share some of the standard things that we have been displaying, and the 2 books that I mentioned last week are also displayed in those slides. So I'll quickly go through those slides. I won't linger on to those. Okay, so this is week 5. We said the prayer. So again, just to reiterate, I'm encouraging people to listen, reflect, debate, and question. And ultimately, the aim is to internalize the learning and incorporate it into life as we go along. The 2 books that I mentioned, and again, we'll come back to you all with uh, how we can get this book. One of you has asked the question whether these books are available as a PDF version. I'm sure they are, but I'll search for those and send in a link. But just during the class, I can mention that there is a site called jainebooks.com. There are actually 2 or 3 sites. If you just type in the name of the books, you will probably find the PDF versions of those that you can download. But I think a lot of you might prefer to have the actual book, and we'll still try and get a few copies of those to distribute. This is the other book that I was talking to you about. Okay, so let's start with the questions. I've divided them as they came into 3 separate slides. So there are in total 9 questions. I'll read the questions out first and then we'll start discussing them. Some of these questions we have addressed briefly, but I'll go in more detail today. The ultimate aim is to reach moksha. Is this something that is attainable in this life, and is it a continuous work of progress through several life cycles? That's question 1. I'll read the 3 questions on this slide and then we'll start talking about that. If all living Jains in the world were to attain moksha, would that mean that that would be the end of Jainism? Number three, I'm confused with the story. So Chilatiputra and Sushima were the ones who went to Devloka previously. If so, how did they end up back on Earth again? I think I answered partly this question, but I think the wider question around this requires an understanding of what the uh, process of birth and death and karma is. So I'll go into the depth of that. And why once in Devloka, I thought the only way was up. How does one know that someone has gone to Devloka or moksha? What is the evidence to prove that Lord Mahavir went to moksha? We addressed this, but we'll look into it in a bit more detail. Do you then have a choice of when you leave Devloka, or do you have to have a certain time cycle and then only you come back to earth and take vows? Okay. You see, right at the beginning, we looked at the fundamental principles of life, the fundamental principles of emancipation, and the concept of who we are, the soul as opposed to the body. So ultimately, what we are that moves from one life to other is the soul or Atma or the spirit, whatever term you want to use. But the idea that that is eternal, that it did not have a beginning and it will not have an end, that transmigration from one life to other, to another, and another, and another is natural, and it continues until the soul reaches moksha. Those are the concepts that we explored. So, by definition, that process is a progress through several life cycles. Now, there is no guarantee that there will always be progress. Most souls and most of us who will hopefully begin an ascending towards that level spiritually will have ups and downs, meaning that spiritually we may improve for a while, and then because we've not completely focused on getting rid of the faults and the kasais, or the anger, greed, lust, pride, all those things, we haven't focused on them, and whatever remains inherent in us, it may pull us down. In some of the stories that we have heard, that has been the case. So we don't always necessarily continuously go up. And every soul has that kind of a cycle until they reach a time when their spiritual progress becomes guaranteed. Now that occurs when the soul acquires certain essential virtuous qualities. The progress of the soul in that respect before it even achieves a higher level is described in what is called the 8 levels of Yoga, Yogni Art Drasti, and this correspond to the uh, 8 levels that Patanjali Yoga actually describes. And there are books which are written which compare the two sort of streams of thought, and how the Jain principles of the soul's emancipation coincides with what is being described in Patanjali Yoga. So that is the 8 levels of yoga. We can use that term. So it is a cycle over many lifetimes. Now, I use the term, don't know if you remember, called Charam Avart. So this cycle of birth and death from one cycle to another continuously has no meaning until we reach a stage of spiritual development whereby it is guaranteed that this is our last cycle, after which there won't be any other cycles. Now that last cycle may still be an infinite number of lives, births and deaths, but it is still, compared with what has gone on before, is still a significant reduction in the downward spiral of the soul. So there is an end in sight, that the soul will from that point onward slowly progress, become more virtuous, become more spiritual, and ultimately get rid of the faults that continuously keep it locked away, keep it imprisoned in the cycle of birth and death, and slowly the soul will progress towards moksha. Now that charama avarth means a circle, and charam means the last. So the word charam avarth means the last circle. So the last circle of life and death. Now don't misunderstand that this is a short circle. As I said, it could have an infinite number of lives in it, but compared with the infinity before that, it is still much shorter. The next big step in development of the soul is when it reaches a stage which is called samyaktva. Now, you've all heard of the book Tattvarth Sutra, which is accepted as a fundamental text of Jainism, and there is a very good English translation on it. But the first verse on it, in that sutra, in that book, basically says that Samyak Darshan Gnan Charitrani Moksha Marga. The path towards moksha or salvation is Samyak Darshan, meaning true understanding, true knowledge, and true conduct. Samyak means right, true. Now, that stage when the soul actually realizes the real nature of self and the universe and the distinction between the soul and the body, and the soul being separate from the body, before that we have all gone through the stage, and we probably still are in that stage where the distinction between us as separate from this body hasn't really sunk in. As a corollary to that understanding and belief is the understanding of the path to moksha, the right Dev, meaning the God that we worship should be the true God, meaning the God who is Vitragi, doesn't need to have a name. Vitragi means without any attachment, and the God who has complete total knowledge to prescribe and to show us the right path. So that Dev, the Guru, is our teachers who are actually following that path, meaning they are nirgranth, like our Muni Maharaj. They have taken the vows, they are following the path, they are not just speaking without actually incorporating that path in their lives. So people like us are not gurus. People like us are just narrators of what is being taught. You can't actually follow. So, as often a lot of us say, is do as we tell you, don't follow what we do. In the sense, the real people to follow, the Nirgranth gurus, are our acharyas, our upadhyayas, our sadhus and sadhvis, who have taken the 5 great vows. And the dharma is the path to follow, which actually is compassionate towards all life. The path teaches you the distinction between what is right and wrong, but also what is beneficial to you and what is harmful to you as the soul in the long run. So that progress, when it reaches that stage of samyak darshan, then that person's or that soul's progress towards moksha suddenly becomes extremely limited, meaning that the progress then starts its ascendance fairly quickly. Now, in the case of Bhagwan Mahavir, that started in the first life that is described. All the lives of Bhagwan Mahavir, Tirthankar Bhagwan Mahavir, the soul, before that particular first life as we describe it and hear about it in Kalpsutra and in all other narrations, the lives before that are not even counted and they are not even described. So that first life was the life of Naisar, and in that particular life, Naisar was a woodcutter who was working for a king, and his daily routine was to go into the forest every day and with his men uh, cut wood from trees for fuel for the king and for the town in which they were living, and then go back in the evening with the wood with them. And in that particular life, Naisar met some monks, and we can go into that story. A lot of you may probably know that story as to what actually happened. And in that life, he meets some monks and begins to understand the true nature of self. And it is from that point that he achieves Samyak Darshan, and his lives subsequent to that are then counted. So, as we know, until from that life onwards till the life of Bhagwan Mahavir, Bhagwan Mahavir's life was the 27th birth. So we describe Bhagwan Mahavir's progress towards moksha and towards becoming a Tirthankar as the 27 lives of Bhagwan Mahavir. So when you say through several life cycles, so Bhagwan Mahavir's life cycle from that point onwards, from point he got Samyak Darshan, was 77 lives. Bhagwan Rushabdev, Bhagwan Parshanath had much shorter number of lives after they achieved Samyak Darshan. Most of the other Tirthankars generally had only about 3 lives from the time they achieved Samyak Darshan. They only had 1 life in Devlok and the next life as a Tirthankar. And it varies. If all the living Jains in the world were to attain moksha, would that mean that there is the end of Jainism? Now, this question is often asked in a different way. Whoever is asked this question thinks that only Jains go to moksha. Am I right? I don't know who asked this question. If you are on the class today, do you want to maybe unmute yourself and maybe explain to me what was the thinking behind this question?
Ajit bhai, they won't be able to unmute themselves, but if they can raise their hand, there's a Zoom button called raise hand,
Okay,
and
great.
that'll identify them.
Yeah. Okay. maybe they're not in the class. So often the question that is asked is that if the path towards moksha is open and slowly all souls, many souls begin to go to moksha, will the world not be empty of souls at some stage? Now that question is often asked of a Tirthankar, and the answer to this question in the Shastras is given that if at any time anybody asks a Tirthankar who is Kevalgnani this particular question, that if the souls begin to go to moksha, then will there be a time when the universe becomes empty of souls? So the answer is that, or the other way the question is put is, how many souls have gone to moksha so far? So the answer is that anantmi nigodno anantmo part. So out of infinity, if you subtract infinity, so infinite numbers of souls have gone to moksha. But if you subtract that infinite number from the existing infinity, then you're still left with infinity. So in short, the answer is that the universe will never become devoid of souls, because the path to moksha has been open forever in the past, and it will remain open forever in the future, and souls will continue to go to moksha. And by the way, the path of Jainism, and to follow, is a quick way of actually spiritual progress, but you can progress spiritually through the different paths. But ultimately, the spiritual development of the soul reaches a stage, whichever path you started on, reaches a stage which becomes universal and clear and similar. So if somebody has started his spiritual development as a monk of a different order, then their spiritual development, meaning the purification of their soul, even following a different path, may still reach that stage where they reach the stage of Samyak Charitra, Samyak Gnan, but ultimately the Gnan, Darshan and Charitra in its true sense would be absolutely the same. Okay, so Jainism is a modern term. What the Tirthankars actually start off every time a Tirthankar is born is the establishment of a Tirth. A Tirth, that is why they are called Tirthankars. They establish a Tirth. A Tirth is a path leading to moksha. And the path leading to moksha is the same with every Tirthankar. So the fundamentals remain the same, but the words that are used to describe that, so the Shastras that we have, they may change. But what they are describing and what they are saying, the words may have changed, but the principles, the fundamentals, the truths remain the same. So the Tirthankas have been born forever in the past. And there are rules about how many Tirthankas are born and where they are born. And they establish a Tirth which then lasts for thousands, millions, billions of years. And then when everything is dwindling, another Tirthankar is born. And these are events that are orchestrated by nature, There are rules about them. They are not rules that have been created by any Tirthankar. These are natural laws. So the Tirthankars themselves are not actually controlling anything. Meaning, as we said, I mean, they are instruments, and we owe them everything in terms of spiritual development and happiness in the universe. But the natural order of things and the natural order of how events unfold in time is a natural order. And that is not something, as we saw right at the beginning, that Jainism does not believe in a creator. So a person who, or a soul who reaches a stage, then conducts and rewards and punishes others, is just not logically possible. So if you reached a stage in moksha where you are completely without any attachment, you are completely happy, you are complete in yourself, why would you go about doing anything to harm or reward anybody else? When you are filled with universal love, all you want to do is show the path to others to get to that stage. And that is what Tirthankars do. The question, once in Devlok, why do they come back down? I thought the only way was up. So let's go back to something else that's fundamental, and let me take you back to some of the slide. If you look at this slide here, this image is probably very familiar to you. And in the first class, I explained the meaning of this. You have seen this being depicted in the Derasar whenever we worship, and that those particular shapes are drawn up with akshat or rice on a board as part of the Akshat Puja. So you, all of you have probably seen it, and that is also. And what does this depict? So the swastika, the four-pronged swastika, represents the cycle of life and death. So it is circular from top to bottom, and each prong represents the one type of life. So Devlok, meaning where celestial beings live. Narak means the beings of hell live. So Devloks are generally above us, but not all of them are above us. There are others which are below us. Those are called the Bhavanpati Devloks. And further below us, much further down, there are these 7 different levels of hell, right down to the bottom, to the end of the universe at the bottom. So Devlok and Narak, and then there is the Manushya, meaning human beings, and the fourth is Tiryanch, and Tiryanch includes all one sense, two sense, three sensed, four sensed, and five sense life apart from Devs, Narak, and Manushya, meaning human beings. So these are the 4-pronged life. Now, what is inherent in that question is that the Devlok is the highest form of life. But in spiritual terms, the highest form of life is the one from which you can actually finish the cycle of birth and death. So the highest form of life is that life from which you can go to moksha. So I presume that the question here is that if you are in Devlok, then you will be progressing upwards, that you've gone to Devlok because you are spiritually more advanced. Now, that is not necessarily so. A lot of people and a lot of us have gone to Devlok because we've done something good, not necessarily something spiritually good. What is the difference? If you do a good deed to help somebody and you've been generous, there is an element of spirituality in it, but unless that is the focus, all you are acquiring is good karmas that then will reward you with good fortune. Now, being in Devlok is good fortune because there you got the facilities for a lot of material happiness. But people who are spiritually advanced, souls who are spiritually advanced, do not desire going to Devlok. To them, Devlok is something just they are going there to get rid of their punya karma and they retain their spiritual awareness and don't go down further. So from Devlok, if they've not focused on their spiritual development in their time in Devlok, they would come down into a lower life form. But if they've progressed spiritually and their spiritual progress path is slowly advancing, then they could be born as a human being and get another chance to slowly progress upwards. And that can go on life after life. But if you look at what happened in Bhagwan Mahavir's life, he spends time in Devlok, he spends time as Tiryansh, meaning he had a life as a lion. He spent time in Narak. He spent time in much smaller life forms. In those 27 life that are described, there are lots of other smaller life forms that are not even counted or described. But that description comes in when we narrate his life cycle, his 27 lives. And Bhagwan Mahavir was a much greater soul than us, obviously, and our particular progress upwards or downwards is going to be much more unpredictable. But what are the things that actually take one up and down? And that is the question. So these are the four different prongs of life. In Devlok, you got a lot of pleasure. In Narak, you got a lot of pain. In neither of those places, you are able to progress much spiritually because in Devlok, you may not feel like eating for hundreds and thousands of years, but you cannot take a vow to say that I'm going to remain hungry. You cannot discard everything and become a monk. In Devlok, that is impossible because the life is not designed and the circumstances are there impossible for that kind of a life. You can only become a monk and progress spiritually and do the penance that will take you upward spiritually as a human being. You cannot do that even in an animal life form. But there are examples of animals, Tiriyanj Panchendriya, meaning like uh, elephants and horses and other life forms who have become aware and grasp the knowledge of self have then from that life progressed further upwards in that life, and there are many animal stories in Jainism which we will recite at some stage. So, in answer to your question, the path should always be upwards from Devlok. That is not true. From Devlok you can go down, and from all these four stages you can go down, you can go upwards, but you cannot go to moksha from any other life except as a human being. How does one know whether one has gone to Devlok or moksha? Well, when a Tirthankar Bhagwan is around, and even at other times, a lot of devs do come down to worship him and are often present in the Samvasaran when Tirthankar Bhagwan is uh, explaining or giving a sermon. So devs are visible to other people at that time. So the corollary is that souls have gone to moksha, to Devlok and come down. So they have the ability to come down, and there are lots of stories or examples of that. At this time, the question would arise, if there are devs, why can't we see them? So there are many, many different kinds of devs, and some of them may appear to people at times in certain guises, and those there are examples of that. In modern day, that is not usual. There are lots of stories about that having happened in the past, but a lot of them can communicate with people, and there are examples even in the current time when people from Devlok have communicated with people. There is no physical evidence of that. You just have to accept around the circumstantial evidence that is presented. How does one know where a particular soul has gone when they in their next life? You wouldn't know unless you have special knowledge. And most of the time, I mean, obviously we haven't seen that in this day and age, but if you look at the narratives from before, there have been many examples, and Jainism is full of stories where these things are described in detail. But it stands to reason and logic that, as I explained, there is a mechanism by which reward and punishment is meted out, and these are natural laws which ensure that there is a system of justice. Do you have a choice for when you leave the Devlok, or you have to go to a certain time cycle and then only you come back to earth to take vows? Now, as I have just explained, whether you go up or down, whether you become a human being or an animal, depends on your karmas. And when you are in your next life, what you do in that life determines where you will go in the next life. Those of us who come back in this life as human beings do not necessarily take vows, do not necessarily progress spiritually. We may go down, we may go to Narak, we may become. Do we have a choice when we leave Devilok this life? Do we have a choice of when we die? Do we have a choice of where we are born? Now, we have exercised that choice and formed karmas which will then guarantee where we will be going. So we have formed Ayushya karma in this life that will guarantee where we will be going in our next life. So in many ways we've exercised that choice. So as we heard in the story of Shrenik Raja, he had in his ignorance exhibited pride at having killed a female deer and her unborn child. That in itself was a heinous act. He made a choice there that determined that he should suffer for that particular violent sin that he committed. One, of killing, and number two, he made it so firm that he did not repent. In fact, he celebrated his violence and his killing. So that guaranteed that he would be born in hell and suffer. There are Bhagwan Mahavir's Ganadhar Gautam Ganadhar has asked Bhagwan Mahavir a huge number of questions, and a lot of his questions were based on this kind of questions that we are asking today. He's asked, what determines where a person is born as a human being? What determines whether a person will go to moksha? What determines whether a person will go to narak? What are the kinds of sins that takes a person down or up? So he's asked a lot of those questions, and there are texts which describe this. There's a Gautam Pucha Karine. There is a text which lists a lot of the questions that he has asked. We can maybe go into details of some of those at some stage, but that is a whole separate topic for maybe another 20 or 30 weeks. But we can go into that sometime in the future. The duration of one's life is also predetermined. Now, at this stage, let me very briefly talk about karma. And then we'll come to this question 4, 5, and 6. We talked about karma determining our future of the soul. Jainism describes 8 different kinds of karmas which obstruct the basic qualities of the soul. 4 of these karmas are called ghati karma, meaning that those 4 karmas will essentially obstruct the most important virtues of the soul, and as long as those 4 are attached to the soul will not be free of its fundamental qualities of total bliss, of complete knowledge, of total understanding, and complete detachment from all worldly and material things. So these 4 ghati karmas are gnana avaraniya karma, meaning that which obstructs knowledge, darsana varaniya karma, that which obstructs vision, Monia karma that obstructs conduct, and Antray karma that obstructs the fundamental quality of happiness of the soul. Then there are 4 other karmas which are not so destructive to the fundamental qualities of the soul, but they imprison the soul. So there is Nam karma, which gives us the body, the shape, the size, all those things, and there are many different peculiarities of that and many different subdivisions of that. Gotra karma, which determines whether we are born in high society, low society. In all times, the distinction between people and where they're born and the status of that particular community, no matter how hard we try to eliminate that, those distinctions do remain. Nam karma, Gotra karma, Aishya karma. Um, Aishya karma is the karma that determines the duration of your lifespan in a particular life. And it is said that Aishya karma is that karma which will be formed during the remaining 1/3 of your life. So, for example, if you got a lifespan of 99 years, then in the 66th year of your current life, sometime you will form your Aishya karma for your next life. And formation of the Aishya karma is momentous, it is instantaneous. In that one particular instant when it is formed, it is then completely set and it cannot be changed, as we saw in that example of Svernik Raja. It may not happen when 1/3 of your life is left. It may happen when 2/3 of that remaining 1/3 is gone. It may not even happen that at that time. It may happen when the remaining 2/3 of that remaining 1/3 is gone, but ultimately it will always happen at the moment of death. So there is no guarantee when that will occur. So our Shastras tell us that most often a person's Ayushya for the next life occurs during the auspicious days of Bij, Pacham, Atham, Agyaras, Chaudas. Therefore, on those days, one should try and be as religious as possible. That in those days, because you don't know when your Aisha karma is going to be formed, and if it is formed on one of those auspicious days, there are no absolute guarantees that that will happen, but this is generally and by and large. Then chances are that if you are in a better frame of mind and in a more spiritual uh, environment, then you're likely to form a better Aisha karma for a better life in your next life. So in brief, this is about the karmas. Question 4. How do we know when the next Tirthankar will be born? If this is not the right time, then when will be the right time for many years? Now, this question brings us to another question that has been asked subsequently about Mahavidya Kshetra. So if you look at the place where we are, this is called, according to Jain geography, Dakshina Bharat. So we are in Bharat Kshetra. This is the Bharat Kshetra that is part of Jambu Dvip. Jambu Dvip is the central landmass which has got a diameter of 100,000 yojans. How big is a yojan? So different versions describe the yojan in this particular concept, in this particular context, is about 3,600 to about 4,000 miles. Bharat Kshetra, where we are in a part of that, is about 526 yojans, and it is on the southern end of Jambudvip. In this Bharat Kshetra and in the 4 other Bharat Kshetras and 5 other Airavat Kshetras, so in all these 10 Kshetras, the time cycle fluctuates, meaning it goes up and down, and they're described as 6 aras of an ascendant time cycle and 6 aras of a descendant time cycle. We are currently in a descendant time cycle. In each ascendant and descendant time cycle, we have 24 Tirthankars each. When will they be born is more or less predetermined, but they are generally born and spread or set up the Tirth during the 4th Ara of each of the ascendant and the descendant time cycle. So all our 24 Tirthankars were there during the 4th Ara. We are currently in the 5th Ara. How long are these Aras? So the 4th Ara is 1 Koda Kodi Sagaro Pam minus 42,000 years. The 5th Ara that we are in currently is 21,000 years. We have passed about 2,600 years out of that. You still got about 18,500 remaining. The 6th Ara will be similar. The 5th and the 6th Ara that we are in currently is progressively deteriorating. So all the problems that we are seeing in this world today are obvious, but they will continue to get worse until the end of the 6th Ara, and then the 1st Ara of the next time cycle, which will be an ascendant time cycle. Things will begin to improve, but the 1st Ara of the next time cycle will be similar to the 6th Ara. That again will be 21,000 years. The 2nd Ara will be similar to the 5th Ara that we are living in now. The 3rd Ara will be slowly progressive, and at the end of that, the first Tirthankar for that time cycle will be born, and all of them will then be born in the 4th Ara of that time cycle. But things will progressively get better and better in that time cycle, and ultimately you reach a stage that we had in this time cycle in the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Ara, when everything was very peaceful, happy, and the way it's described in Jainism, it was like what the Bible describes as paradise, where there are everything that human beings needed. The world was extremely peaceful, there were no wars, everything. the life cycle, the lifespans were extremely long, and there is no disease, and death was painless after a very long life. So we can go into the details of this at some stage, but this is how the 24 Tirthankars that we had currently. The next set of Tirthankars in this particular Bharat Kshetra will start many years after this, and we'll have 24 Tirthankars in that ascendant time cycle, and that cycle goes on and on. Ascendant, descendant, ascendant, descendant. And that is how the natural rhythm works in the 5 Bharat and the 5 Airavat Kshetras. Somebody has asked later on about the Mahavidaya Kshetra. The Mahavidaya Kshetras are different. There, the time is permanently similar to the 4th Ara that we have here. So there are always Tirthankars in the Mahavidaya Kshetra. How many Mahavidaya Kshetras are there? Again 5. But Mahavidaya Kshetras are very large, and each Mahavidaya Kshetra has got 32 Vijayas. Vijayas are sort of enclosed areas. They are like a whole world in themselves, and each Vijay can have a Tirthankar in them. And the Tirthankars are born there, and they um, achieve nirvana and go to moksha, and after many years another Tirthankar is born. So at the moment we have 20 such Tirthankars who are alive, who were born around the time of our 18th Tirthankar Arnath Bhagwan. And they are still alive. They all have a lifespan which is similar to the lifespan of Bhagwan Vasudev. The nearest one to us, as I said, is Simandar Swami, who is, there are temples of Simandar Swami in a lot of different places. How many Tirthankars? At the moment there are 20. How many Tirthankars can we have in the universe together? There are 32 Vijayas in each Mahavidaya Kshetra. So in the 5 Mahavidaya Kshetras in total there are 160 Vijayas. And the 5 Bharat and the 5 Airavat Kshetras, meaning 10, each one of them can have a Tirthankar each. And at the time of our second Tirthankar, Ajitnath Bhagwan, there were a total of 170 Tirthankars together in the universe. In all these places, 5 Bharat, 5 Airavat, and 1 each in each of the 32 Vijayas of Mahavidaya Kshetra, of the 5 Mahavidaya Kshetras. So I hope that answers your question number 5. It feels like a system that is very heavily stacked against success if only one soul was lost to reach moksha after Bhagwan Mahavir. Surely the system, there are lots of souls who went to moksha after Bhagwan Mahavir, but what I was saying was that the last one who went to moksha was Jambu Swami. After him, the road to moksha from this place has been closed, but that does not mean that the road to moksha is closed. The road to moksha is open in all the Mahavidaya Kshetras, and the road to moksha is open to all of us, depending on how we perform spiritually. Surely the system wants more souls to succeed to make it back home. Then why so long and complicated? The question, I get the sense that this question is born out of a sense that these are rules that are laid out by somebody. These are rules that have been created. These are rules that are natural, that they exist. But in terms of the question of unfairness, I was explaining this concept to my niece the other day. If you look at nature and you look at the arrangement of the six auras that I've just described, each time cycle in Bharat and Airavat Kshetra, the length of each time cycle is described as 10 Koda Kodi Sagaropam. The first 9 Koda Kodi Sagaropam are in the first, second, and third, where earth is like paradise. A Sagaropam is an uncountable number of years, and that's a very, very long time. The fourth ara, when the Tirthankars are born, that is when the road to moksha opens. So before that, in the first three aras, there is a lot of happiness, there is a lot of material happiness, and like Devlok, there is no dharma there, meaning the yugalik in the first three aras are completely peaceful and happy, and when they die, they go to Devlok because they have not committed any major sin during their very, very long life. And they enjoy the fruits of Devlok as well, but during that time, before Bhagwan Rushabdev, the road to moksha was not open. And that is an extremely long period. So in terms of total happiness that we are looking at, the universe, the world is actually generally a very rewarding, a very happy place. The time during which we have got a very, very bad life or unhappy life is during the fifth and the sixth ara. That is where we are currently. But how many years is that? 21,000, 21,500. Similarly, sixth ara. But before that, there is an almost infinite number of years. We'll come to how you describe a Sagaropam. There is another uncountable term that is used to describe numbers when they are not count is called Palyopam. A Sagaropam is much, much bigger than a Palyopam. And let me just describe how a Palyopam is described. A Palyopam is described that if there is a hole in the ground which is 1 yojan long, 1 yojan broad, and 1 yojan deep, and it is stacked full of very fine hair, so full that if the army of a Chakravarti were to walk on that, it wouldn't actually budge. So it is so tightly packed. And if every year or every 100 years you remove one hair out of that, and the time it takes to actually empty that hole, that is the length of one Palyopam. And a Sagaropam is much, much longer. So the time cycles that we are looking at are extremely long. So what I was explaining to my niece yesterday was that in many ways nature is actually very generous. In terms of pain and suffering, you got very little of it. So it's actually very hopeful. If you look at and go into the depth of Jainism, it is probably the most helpful and the most sort of hopeful religion. It gives you the onus and gives you the understanding that you are in control. There are rules which will pull you down if you don't follow them, but those rules are not stacked against you. Everything is actually there to help you understand and pull you back up It is up to us to take that particular path and progress. Okay. Last three questions. If we can't go to moksha in this lifetime, can we go to Mahavidya Kshetra? Absolutely. After this life, where we will be born, we don't know. But if we go to Mahavidya Kshetra, will we definitely go to moksha from there? No guarantees. You could be born in Mahavidya Kshetra, but not as a human being. You could be born as an animal. You may not have the facility. We may be born in Mahavidya Kshetra, but we may not actually encounter in that place the facilities to actually progress spiritually. But the land is there. It is a much more spiritually progressive land, and we have the opportunity, if we go there, to progress. I didn't really understand this question number 8. Doesn't feel very loving or compassionate. I think I actually, every time I read and go into the depths of Jainism, you come back with feeling so.
Sorry, Ajit bhai, your voice is breaking up a little bit. Could you check your audio setting? Make sure background is set to low.
Okay. How do I do that? Let me
If you
just
stop the screen sharing first, yeah.
yeah. Speakers, audio setting. So is it same as system speakers? Speakers are
Suppress background noise. If it should be on low. If you just check that on audio settings.
so audio settings. So it's on low.
Okay, fine. All right, then that's fine. If you want to continue.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be finishing in a few minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you have to start the screen sharing again.
Yeah. Can you see my slides? Oh, sorry, resume slideshow. Okay.
You have to share from Zoom again, please.
Yeah. Can you see the slides?
Not
Get
yet.
them? Not yet. Sorry.
If you go to Zoom and click the share
Yeah.
screen
Sorry.
button.
Okay. So I've explained about Mahavidya Kshetra. We will need to go into more details of where these land masses and things are, but we can come to that. Okay, I'll end here, and if there are any other questions, then I don't know if Mira has collected them, then we can address them. But if I've said anything that is against the principles of Jainism and the teachings of the great Tirthankaras, Michami Dapadam, next week we'll talk about Bhagwan Mahavir and the other Tirthankars. We will take some narrative from the Kalp Sutra. Okay. Thank you, but I'll wait if there are questions. Mira, if you can please open up.
I haven't received any questions, Ajit Bhai.
Okay, I have received a question. although it might be quite long. I can read it out and
Yeah,
see if you want to take it now or next week.
yeah.
Okay, so the question is, if Jainism says there is no creator, then why does every major religion and philosophy say that there is a creator? If this is the truth, then why is it not more prominently a prominent knowledge and the status quo? And it continues, how does Jainism explain great personalities that Hinduism then discusses, such as Shiva, Krishna, and Ram? There's another 2 or 3 parts to this, but this is the first part.
Mhm. Okay. It is a long question, and the debate between different religions is something that will require a lot of discussion. And I know if we begin to debate this, we won't be able to actually do much else during the class, but the questions that you're asking are very important. I don't think a lot of us are well qualified to answer a lot of these questions about the differences between the religion. We need to have much deeper knowledge of the different religions. But if you look at the way, see, if we look at what Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, describes, the Vedas and the concept of creation and of God, Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. And I sort of talked about that at the first lesson. Brahma meaning the creator, Vishnu meaning the operator, and Mahesh, the same as Shiva, as being the destroyer. That concept, in terms of how you look at it symbolically, there are sort of ways of explaining that. There is a very good description of what the symbolism behind Ganesh is and why we got those different things that are being described. So a lot of the narratives that we hear in Hinduism, if you go into the depths of that, of the Purans and the Vedas, there are very many similarities, and sometimes it's a different interpretation that has sort of created the difference that is there. So if you look at all the 11 Gandhars of Bhagwan Mahavir, Gautam, Agnibhuti, Vayubhuti, all the other Sudharma Swami, they were all Ved Pandits, and they had acquired all their spiritual knowledge from the Vedas, but they were left with certain doubts in their minds based on the interpretation that they had come to believe in. And when they come to see Bhagwan Mahavir on the first day, when the current Tirth was established, on the second day of Bhagwan Mahavir's Kyavardhan, Bhagwan Mahavir recites or quotes their doubts in their mind, and this is described in great detail of all the doubts of all the 11 Gandhas. So they each had one fundamental question that was based on their interpretation of the Vedas, and Bhagwan Mahavir answers their doubts after having read their mind. They didn't have to ask the question. Bhagwan Mahavir knew, obviously, with his Kyodnan, and he explains to them using the Vedas. Bhagwan Mahavir explains to all the 11 Gandhas, one at a time as they come in, as to you have got this particular doubt in your mind that has come from your interpretation of this particular verse of the Vedas. This is how you have interpreted it, but the real interpretation and the real meaning of this is this. He doesn't quote anything else, he's quoting the Vedas. Remember that Jainism is a religion of multifacetedness. So no truth is complete until you are looking at the context of that particular religion. A lot of the fundamental differences about creation and all that, if you look at it from one point of view, so we worship the Tirthankars. And some of the stavans, if you hear, we say that our Tirthankars are the ones who will give us everything. From one point of view of interpretation, everything that is good and auspicious and the source of our spiritual progress all comes from the Tirthankars. But if we, on the one hand, say the Tirthankars don't do anything, and on the other hand, we are constantly thanking them for having done so much for us, it is a point of view that from one angle is right, from an absolute angle, from a different angle, it is not complete. So if you look at everything that all the other religions are saying, there is a point of view from which that is correct. But if you're looking at an actual creation, then logically it is actually difficult to then say that the person who created that person or that soul. If he created the universe, what was the purpose of that? If you are all powerful and you are creating something, then why would you create anything that was imperfect? And a lot of these questions then become very difficult to answer. But from a different angle, the issue of creation becomes understandable. But if you then say that the universe started at some stage, then obviously we got to believe in the Big Bang theory. It started at one point and it will end at another point. Then it becomes really difficult to actually uh, reconcile and logically explain everything. Then we are going back to total materialism and actually negating the concept of the spirit at all. But the fundamental truth that every religion believes in is that the spirit, the soul exists. It's come from somewhere, it's going somewhere. So if you sit down and read the Gita, a lot of the narrative in the Gita is everything that Jainism is teaching as well. So there are, but it becomes quite a detail, and I'm not qualified to go into the details of that. But if you want to listen to narratives, Rakesh Bhai Zaveri has done a whole series on the Gita. And if you sit down and read the Gita's translation, there is a lot there. And if you go into some of the depths of some of the Hindu spiritual teachers, everything is in the air. And if you look at truth, my younger son likes Eckhart Tolle. And if you listen to Eckhart Tolle, a lot of what he is actually talking about is basic pure Jainism. So remember that Jainism is about Anekantvad. Truth is multifaceted, truth is multi-sided, and any particular statement needs to have a context with it, and with the context it is the truth. But without the context, an absolute statement will always have problems with it. I hope that helps. Okay. Anything else?
No, I think we'll wrap it up now if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
Sorry, just one question.
Yeah, Ronak.
So we are told to do stop and pray to get rid of our karmas, to go to moksha. However, we are told moksha is not open. Whether we are in a descending life cycle, are we not going to on sorry, are we not going to keep doing more karmas in these life cycles? And then how would thoughts and prayers help us in a descending life cycle?
So you see, Ronak, it's a very important question. What, as I've explained earlier, spiritual progress is a slow, progressive thing from life after life. So everything that we do does not necessarily need to have a result in this life. Karmas accumulate, they come to fruition in many lives in the future. They do not necessarily come to fruition in this life, and everything that we have done is not necessarily lost. So we, doing tap, we get rid of some karmas, but getting rid of all karmas is an extremely tough and uphill struggle. If you just remember what Bhagwan Mahavir did, and we'll learn more about it in the next week's class. He did severe penance for 12.5 years, and he was a greatly elevated spiritual soul. And it still took him a huge amount of effort to actually get rid of all his karmas. But whatever we do is beneficial, it is progressive, and we are slowly building up the level of, so whatever we do that is being prescribed or has been taught to us by our great Tirthankars has its benefit. It's not just tap. Good thoughts, Dev Darshan, Pujan, helping others, being honest, being non-violent, getting rid of our anger, all those things are part and parcel of the methods of getting rid of karmas. But don't forget that at the times that we are getting rid of some karmas, we are also engaging in activities that are accumulating more bad karmas, sometimes more good karmas. But ultimately, getting rid of all karmas is about purifying your soul. And that is something that can start at any stage, but it takes time to progress onto a stage where moksha is possible. But nothing good that we do is lost, like nothing bad that we do is lost either, but we always have the choice to make changes and to improve. Thanks. Okay, shall we end? सर्वमङ्गलमाङ्गल्यं सर्वकल्याणकारणं प्रधानं सर्वधर्माणां जयं जयति शासनम्